Hello everyone, I'm Hasna and today we are going to start with the second chapter of a book, Moments, and the title of the chapter is The Adventures of Toto by Ruskin Bond. Let us have a small chapter sketch. The Adventures of Toto is an interesting story of a mischievous pet monkey. The narrator's grandfather loved animals and he brings home a pet monkey, Toto. The complete story revolves around Toto and his mischief, and finally he is sent back to the same place from where he came. Grandfather bought Toto from a Tonga driver for the sum of 5 rupees. The Tonga driver used to keep the little red monkey tied to a feeding trout. The grandfather purchased Toto from a Tonga driver, and when grandfather saw Toto, he was very disappointed by the way Toto was actually kept. The Tonga driver had actually tied up Toto to a feeding trout, that is a container containing food for animals. And the monkey really looked very sad and depressed. And so grandfather immediately decided that he had to help out Toto and he had to be taken to his private zoo. Toto was a pretty monkey. His bright eyes sparkled with mischief beneath deep-set eyebrows, and his teeth, which were pearly white, were very often displayed in a smile that frightened the life out of elderly Anglo-Indian ladies. Now Toto was quite good-looking. He had bright eyes, which were very mischievous, and had deep-set eyebrows and a good set of teeth, which were pearly white. But then, the way Toto smiled was good enough to scare elderly ladies. And in this story, specifically, it's mentioned Anglo-Indian ladies. Now, who are Anglo-Indians? Anglo-Indians are mixed Indian and British, who have mixed Indian and British ancestors. And they may be of British descent. That means they may be born in Britain, or they Britain and are living presently in India. But his hands looked dried up, as though they have been pickled in the sun for many years. Now, although Toto's face was pretty, but his hands seemed very dried and wrinkly, almost pickled. Here, pickled means they seemed to be very dry and full of wrinkles. Yet his fingers were quick and wicked. The fingers are referred to as wicked because he was up to some mischief or the other. His hands just could not sit still. While adding to his good looks, his fingers and his tail while adding to his good looks. Grandfather believed a tail would add to anyone's good looks. Now, obviously, as all animals have tails, Toto too had a tail, and according to grandfather, a tail adds to anyone's good looks. So obviously this was also an added thing to the statement that Toto was a pretty monkey. And it was not just an ordinary tail. It was actually a third hand for Toto, because there were places where Toto's hands could not reach, and so for those places he used his third hand, that is his tail. What would he do? He would at times try to reach out to these places, and supposing there's any delicacy or any special kind of food that is kept on the table and he is unable to reach to it, he would use his tail instead to scoop out the delicacy, and then he would enjoy it. So this was how he used his tail. He even used his tail to hang on the branches. So it would not be wrong if I would say that Toto had 3 hands. 2 were actually hands, and the third one was his tail, which acted as his third hand. Now, grandmother always fussed when grandfather brought home some new bird or animal. So it was decided that Toto's presence should be kept a secret from her until she was in a particularly good mood. Now, grandmother did not like grandfather always bringing home some animal or the other. She disliked it. She complained about it. But then once he brought the animal home, she never really threw it out of the house. But then yet Grandfather did not want to disappoint her, and so grandfather as well as the narrator decided that they would just keep the arrival of Toto a secret from the grandmother till they find an appropriate condition or a time when grandmother's mood would be excellent, so that they can introduce Toto to her without her being angry or upset. Now, grandfather and I put him away in a little closet opening into my bedroom wall. Grandfather and the narrator, they decided that they were going to hide Toto inside a little closet which was there in the narrator's room, and it was in one of the walls of his bedroom, where he was tied securely, or we thought, to a peg fastened into the wall. Now, Toto was actually kept in the closet, and he was fastened into the wall with the help of a peg. A peg is some kind of a nail which is there on the wall, and there some attachment was made, and that attachment was actually connected to Toto's neck, and that is how he was actually fastened, or let's say tied up securely and kept in the closet. And the narrator and the grandfather were absolutely sure that this was quite safe and a foolproof plan to actually keep Toto away from the rest of the family, and this was a place where he could be secretly kept from the other members in the family. Now, they were very wrong, because a few hours later, when grandfather and I came back to release Toto, we found that the walls, which had been covered with some ornamental paper chosen by grandfather, now stood out as naked bricks and plaster. Now, after a few hours, when both the narrator and the grandfather decided that okay, now they were ready to release Toto, they came, and to their utter surprise, they found that Toto was nowhere to be found. Instead, the condition of the room was really pathetic, because as the walls, which had been covered with some ornamental paper would be some kind of a decorative wallpaper, and grandfather had chosen it just in order to hide out the bricks and the plaster, and Toto had done his best to remove all the ornamental paper and reveal the bricks and the plaster which were hidden because of this ornamental paper stuck to them. The peg on the wall had been wrenched from its socket, and the peg that was there, that was also taken out. It was pulled out. It was no longer there in its place in the wall. And my school blazer, which had been hanging there, was in shreds. The narrator also noticed that his school blazer was also in shreds. That means it was also torn apart in pieces. Now, the narrator was really not sure what would be the reaction of the grandmother. But grandfather did not worry at all. He was very pleased, because according to him, the thing that pleased him or made him happy was that Toto was just like any other monkey. He was behaving normally. Had he not behaved this way, grandfather would have been a little worried, because typically a monkey is supposed to behave like this. Okay, so grandfather didn't worry. He seemed pleased with Toto's performance. "He's clever," said grandfather. "Given time, I'm sure he could have tied the torn pieces of your blazer into a rope and made his escape from the window." Now, grandfather's conclusion is, he came to a conclusion that Toto was extremely clever, and he also said that had Toto got some more time, then maybe Toto would have actually knotted or put together all the shreds or all the pieces of the torn blazer and made a rope for himself, and later on used it to escape from the window. So maybe the situation would have been such that the moment the monkey was tearing up the blazer, that was the moment when suddenly the narrator and the grandfather entered the house. Had he got enough time, that grandfather concluded that he could have done much more than what they were actually seeing in picture. So I hope this much is clear. We'll continue the lesson in the second video. His presence in the house still a secret, Toto was now transferred to a big cage in the servants' quarter, where a number of grandfather's pets lived very sociably together. Now, Toto's presence had to be kept a secret, and so Toto was transferred to a big cage in the servants' quarter. So, in servants' quarter, there was a place where all the animals, most of the animals that the grandfather possessed, they were kept there in the cage, and all of them lived very happily together. Now, what were the kinds of animals that were found there? A tortoise, a pair of rabbits, a tamed squirrel, and for a while my pet goat. But the monkey wouldn't allow any of his companions to sleep at night. Now, all these animals were living quite peacefully all these days, but suddenly Toto started creating a lot of commotion there. He started disturbing everyone so much that all the other animals who were living very peacefully all these days, they just could not sleep. And then grandfather, who came to the rescue, finally realized that he had to do something else. Actually, grandfather, who was a pensioner, had some work outside the city, and so he had to go to Saharanpur for his pension work. And he had decided that he would keep Toto in the servants' quarter so that grandmother does not know about Toto's presence. But looking at the condition that had occurred then, the grandfather realized that if he does not take Toto along with him, then Toto would create so much of commotion in the servants' quarter that very soon, before grandfather would return, grandmother would be able to know that Toto was actually there. So grandfather finally decided that grandfather would be taking Toto along with him to Saharanpur. Unfortunately, I could not accompany grandfather on that trip. Now, unfortunately, the narrator just could not accompany the grandfather. And although the narrator did not go, but he was very much aware of what had happened in the trip, because grandfather on his return shared everything elaborately with the narrator. Now, there was a lot of preparation that was made so that Toto could go on the journey. A big canvas bag, black in color, was purchased for Toto, and some straw was kept beneath so that Toto could actually sit comfortably inside the canvas bag. And once the canvas bag was shut, it was almost impossible for Toto to come out of the bag. So this bag became his new abode. Abode means home. Toto could not get his hands through the opening, and the canvas was too strong for him to bite his way through. Now, Toto was very good at destroying things. We had already seen we had already learned in video number 1 that he had torn the blazer of the narrator. But now this canvas bag was so tough that Toto could not tear it up, could not bite through it, and so he was just stuck inside. Now, all the efforts that Toto was making was actually showing up, because Toto just could not come out of the bag, but the bag in that process seemed to be rolling, seemed to be jumping in the air, and that was something that attracted the attention of all the people, onlookers, or the crowds who were there at the railway station. Toto remained in the bag as far as Saharanpur, but while grandfather was producing his ticket at the railway turnstile, Toto suddenly poked his head out of the bag and gave the ticket collector a wide grin. Now, Toto remained in the bag as far as Saharanpur, but when grandfather was producing his ticket at the railway turnstile is an exit gate. When he had almost completed his journey and when he was about to exit that area, when he was about to show his ticket to the ticket collector, that is the time when Toto somehow managed to poke or show up out of the bag. He just took out his head, and the moment he saw the ticket collector, he gave a wide smile to the ticket collector. The poor man was taken aback, but with great presence of mind and much to grandfather's annoyance, he said, "Sir, you have a dog with you. You will have to pay for it accordingly. Now the poor man here, the poor man is the ticket collector. The ticket collector was surprised, and although he was surprised, he just did not express his surprise by shouting or saying something. He just very calmly informed grandfather that grandfather had a dog with him and he had to pay for the dog which he was carrying along. Now grandfather was annoyed not just because the ticket collector was asking money, but grandfather was annoyed because he just could not understand how an educated person like a ticket collector could not understand the difference between a monkey and a dog. Now that annoyed the grandfather a lot, and the moment the ticket collector informed him that you will have to pay for it accordingly, grandfather got irritated because grandfather was ready to pay, but he was ready to pay for a monkey. He was not carrying a dog, so why should he be paying for a dog which he was not carrying? And that was actually annoying to the grandfather. I hope this much is clear. We will continue the rest in the third part of the video. In vain did grandfather take Toto out of the bag. In vain did he try to prove that a monkey did not qualify as a dog or even as a quadruped. Here quadruped means any four-footed animal. Now grandfather tried his level best to make the ticket collector or convince the ticket collector that Toto was a monkey and not a dog. And so in order to prove himself, he took out Toto from his bag. Toto was classified a dog by the ticket collector, and 3 rupees was the sum handed over as his fare. But the ticket collector did not agree to it. Now, it's not that the ticket collector did not understand the difference between a dog or a monkey. But according to the guidelines of a ticket collector, the animals that usually are carried or usually are classified as pets are usually dogs and cats. So maybe the category in which he could actually classify Toto was either a dog or a cat, the common type of a pet animal, and there was no option for a monkey. And so in order to charge something from grandfather, he had to classify Toto somewhere, and so he classified Toto as a dog. It's not that he did not know the difference, but it's just that he did not have the option of classifying or putting Toto under the head of a monkey. There were only very limited options, and the best option that Toto could fit in was actually a dog. And finally, the grandfather had to pay rupees 3 for Toto as his fare. Then grandfather, just to get his own back, took from his pocket out pet tortoise and said, "What must I pay for this, since you charge for all animals?" Now, grandfather was very irritated by the fact that the ticket collector had classified Toto as a dog and charged rupees 3. That means the grandfather paid 3 rupees for carrying a dog which he was actually not carrying. And so in order to just get an upper hand, he just took out of anger from his pocket his tortoise and showed it to the ticket collector, and asked him, "What should I pay for this, since you charge for all animals?" Now he was very angry and he said, "Okay, now tell me, what am I supposed to pay for this tortoise that I am carrying?" Now the ticket collector looked closely at the tortoise. The ticket collector very simply, without any inhibition or without any kind of overacting, just looked at the tortoise, observed it closely, and prodded it with his finger. Now he just tried to even touch it, feel it, and then gave grandfather a pleased and a triumphant look and said, "No charge, it is not a dog." Now, after observing the tortoise for quite some time, the ticket collector came to a conclusion that this animal that the grandfather was taking or carrying with him could not be classified under a dog, because there were many features which were different from a dog, like it was not having a tail as long as a dog, or maybe it was the size of it was not fit to be classified under a dog. And so the ticket collector just simply concluded that you don't have to pay anything because it does not fall under the category of a dog. When Toto was finally accepted by grandmother, he was given a comfortable home in the stable, where he had a companion, the family donkey, Nana. Now, finally, when grandfather returned, and finally, when the whole story was narrated to all the people in the family, even grandmother understood and realized and knew about Toto, and she very happily accepted Toto as a family member and made some arrangement for Toto to live with them. So she made the arrangements for Toto to live in the stable with their family donkey Nana. Now, on Toto's first night in the stable, grandfather paid him a visit to see if he was comfortable. So, very casually, just grandfather went to have a look whether Toto was comfortable with Nana. But when he went to the stable, he was surprised to find that Nana, without apparent cause, pulling at her halter and trying to keep her head as far as possible from the bundle of hay. Now, the grandfather was very surprised to see that Nana uh, was pulling at her halter. Now, what is a halter? It's a rope placed around her head for tying the animal, and she was just moving her head away from the bundle of hay that was kept in front of her. And the grandfather did not understand why Nana was behaving like that. Grandfather gave Nana a slap around her haunches. So grandfather just very loudly gave us very severely gave a slap around the Nana's haunches. Haunches is it's like the thighs of the animal's legs, and she jerked back, dragging Toto with her. And then she jerked and she moved her head, and there grandfather could actually see the real problem. And the problem was Toto was hanging in her Nana's long ears, and that too with his sharp little teeth. So obviously Nana was in pain, and that was the reason he was trying to actually get off Toto from his ears, and that's the reason why he was actually looking at the other side and not towards the hay. Toto and Nana never became friends. So Toto was taken away from there, but after that day, Toto and Nana never became friends again. A great treat for Toto during cold winter evening was the large bowl of warm water given to him by grandmother for his bath. Now, there's something that Toto really liked, and that was a treat for him during cold winter evening. And what was it? Grandmother used to give him a large bowl of warm water. And what was that for? For giving Toto a good bath. And Toto would really enjoy, like any other person or any other creature. We hesitate to take bath during winters, but then if the water is quite warm, it's very cozy and very tempting to go inside and just keep on sitting under the water. So Toto too was very fascinated by this, and it almost seemed to be a great treat for him. He would cunningly test the temperature with his hand, then gradually step into the bath, first one foot, then the other, until he was into the water up to his neck. Now, although Toto knew that the water provided by the grandmother was warm, yet he had a lot of tantrums. He would just try to gather attention and just not go directly inside the water, but instead just try to check the temperature of the water with one hand, and then gradually put his one feet and then the other feet, and then gradually try to dip himself and then dip himself under the water till he was neck deep under the water. Now, from where did he learn all this? The narrator tells us that the narrator too does something like that, and that's the reason the narrator says that the monkey was only imitating him. What he did was just the replica of what the narrator usually did before a bath. Now, once Toto was comfortable, he would take the soap in his hand or feet and rub himself all over. When the water became cold, he would get out and run as quickly as he could to the kitchen fire in order to dry himself. If anyone laughed at him during his performance, Toto's feelings would be hurt and he would refuse to go on with his bath. Now, his usual activity would be he would just suddenly come out of his bath and run towards the fireplace in order to keep himself warm. And this activity would make everyone in the family laugh, and Toto would not like people laughing at him. He would get hurt, and that would be the reason for him to refuse taking bath the following few days. So I hope this much is clear. We will continue the rest of the chapter in our next video. One day in the kitchen, a large kettle was kept in the fire, and that was kept because tea was supposed to be prepared. Toto, finding nothing better to do, decided to remove the lid. Toto found nothing to do and so decided, why not take a bath? So he removed the lid, and finding the water just warm enough for a bath, he got in with his head sticking out from the open kettle. So he decided, since he found the water quite comfortable, he decided to take a bath. He just went inside the kettle with his head sticking out of the kettle. This was just fine for a while until the water began to boil. Now it was quite good for some time, but as the temperature of the water started rising, things became a little bit uncomfortable for him. Now what did Toto do? Toto did not understand that there was fire underneath the kettle. He did not understand that there was danger to his life. He just could not understand why suddenly things started becoming uncomfortable. So water started boiling, and Toto then raised himself a little, but finding it cold outside, sat down again. Now he wanted to come out, so the moment he raised his body could actually feel the cold around, because the temperature was very, very cold. And the moment he realized that the outside atmosphere was quite cold, he again put himself back inside the kettle covered under the boiling water. Finding it cold outside, sat down again, and he continued hopping up and down for some time until grandmother arrived and hauled him half boiled out of the kettle. Now he was almost about to get boiled, but luckily for him, grandmother suddenly arrived in the kitchen and found him jumping in and out inside the kettle. And just grandmother almost panicked, but she took out Toto from the kettle, and then Toto was finally saved. Now, the narrator tells us that if there is a part of the brain specially devoted to mischief, that part was largely developed in Toto. The narrator says that there are people believe that we all have brain, and there are different parts of a brain which do different kinds of work. And the narrator says that if the brains are divided into such section that one part is for mischievousness and one part is for doing something else, then the narrator says that if that is the case, then Toto's section of the brain which was responsible for mischief, that portion was, I think, according to the narrator, was very well developed, because Toto was up to mischiefs after mischief. And so the narrator came to a conclusion that maybe his that portion of the brain which was responsible for mischiefs was very, very well developed. He was always tearing things to pieces. Whenever one of my aunts came near him, he made every effort to get hold of her dress and tear a hole in it. Now, Toto was very, very destructive. He would just keep on tearing things, especially when the narrator's aunt would come. She would wear some kind of a lacy, ornamental kind of a dress, which would be very delicate and very girly kind of a dress. Toto would make sure that he would actually make a hole, or he would actually create some kind of a damage to the dress. One day at lunchtime, a large dish of pulao stood in the center of the dining table. We entered the room to find Toto stuffing himself with rice. Now, one day in the dining table, there was a huge plate, and it was full of pulao. And suddenly, when the narrator entered the room, he found Toto just stuffing himself, eating himself, just filling himself with the pulao, that is the rice. fried rice. My grandmother screamed and Toto threw a plate at her. Now, grandmother was shocked because she did not expect that Toto would just be sitting at the dining table eating the pulao that she had prepared for everyone to eat. So she shouted, and the moment she shouted, Toto just picked up the plate that was kept in the dining table and threw at her. One of my aunts rushed forward and received a glass of water in her face. Now, one of the narrator's aunts, just came in front, and Toto gave her a good welcoming by splashing a glass of water on her face. When grandfather arrived, Toto picked up the dish of pulao and made his exit through a window. Now, when grandfather came in the scene, the monkey did not throw anything at him. Instead, he just lifted the dish of the pulao and made his exit through the window, and he climbed a tree. We found him in the branches of the jackfruit tree, the dish still in his arms. He remained there all afternoon, eating slowly through the rice, determined on finishing every grain. And then, in order to spite grandmother, who had screamed at him, he threw the dish down from the tree. Now, he climbed a jackfruit tree and was actually eating the pulao and enjoying the pulao slowly till he finished the whole item. And then, finally, as if to take out his grudge against grandmother, who had shouted at him when she saw Toto eating the pulao, he just threw the dish from the tree down, and obviously when the dish landed on the ground, it broke into hundreds of pieces. Obviously, till this much we know that Toto was extremely destructive and things were actually becoming out of control now. Obviously, Toto was not the sort of pet we could keep for long. Obviously, any person would not like to have a pet who is very destructive. So, the narrator tells us that for somebody to own a pet like Toto was very difficult because Toto was extremely destructive, and even grandfather realized it. All these days, maybe grandfather just overlooked all the mischiefs and destructions that Toto was creating, but that day, grandfather to realize that now things were out of control and things had to be taken up seriously. We are all not well to do and could not afford the frequent loss of dishes, clothes, curtains and wallpaper. Now the narrator tells us that they were not very rich, so it was very difficult for them to very often keep on replacing dishes, clothes, curtains, wallpapers which were destroyed by Toto. And so finally one day grandfather decided that Toto had to be sent back to the place from where he was brought. So grandfather tried to locate the Tonga driver and sold Toto back to him only for 3 rupees. So he had purchased Toto for 5 rupees and sold Toto for 3 rupees. It's although it was a loss, but yet that situation was something very forceful, where the narrator's grandfather had no other alternatives other than to sell off Toto to the Tonga driver. I hope this chapter is clear to you.